Thank you, Dave. And thanks to everyone for joining our session tonight. I'm sure like most of us, you might be getting a little bit of stir crazy. So it's always good to come out and get together as a community, even if we can't do it in person. So just a few quick intro slides before we get into our main event. So in terms of the organizers of the group, we have myself from Turn Digital, we have Mike Dixon from Wellington Street Consulting, and we have David Pelleggi from Staples. We've all been in this Office 365 space for quite a while, and we're happy to help organize and bring the community together through this user group. So in case you missed our session last month, we had a great session with Seth Maislin about Office 365 information management. We have recorded the session. We have not had a chance to publish it to YouTube yet, but keep an eye out for that in the coming weeks. And this is definitely a great session to rewatch if you haven't had the chance to join live. That being said, we will also be recording this session, so if you'd ever like to come back and watch it again or share it with your colleagues afterwards, we generally post the sessions onto our YouTube channel about 2 to 3 weeks after the session completes. All right, so in the next few slides, we typically cover some of the major updates in Office 365 since the last time that we've met. Now, there's probably about 150 updates that have happened since March 16th. But we'd like to highlight some of the most important ones that impact our user base the most here as part of the user group. So quick recap. So Microsoft has renamed most of their business level licenses from a variety that you see on the left to what you now see on the right. Everything has essentially become Microsoft 365 for the business editions of Office 365. This does not impact the enterprise licenses, the first line workers, or education or government. Those continue to be O365 E1 through E5 and equivalents. But this change brings a little bit of uniformity across the various different SKUs and names that you had previously. Like with any change, there's some people that love it, there's some people that hate it, and there's some people in between. Personally, I welcome the change. I think it's good to have a bit of uniformity across the different options that our customers have. More information on this in the link at the bottom, and we'll be sharing our presentation through our website after this meeting as well. So, in my opinion, this is one of the biggest updates that has occurred in the last month, and we now have the ability to see up to 9 different videos within a Teams meeting. Previously, there was a limit of 4, which really gave competitors such as Zoom an advantage when hosting virtual happy hours or any kind of social interactions where you have more than 4 people attending. So this is a welcome change, and if you read the article that's linked to here at the bottom, you'll see that Microsoft is not stopping at 9, and they have plans to continue this growing further. Another really important part about this announcement is that this came based on the user voice submissions, where user voice is a platform that Microsoft has that allows users of the platform to come in and voice their opinions, offer suggestions, and it allows other members to vote on which feedback or which improvements are going to be most beneficial to the overall community. And then based on the ones that have the highest amount of votes, Microsoft actually keeps an eye on that, and they track that as part of the enhancements that they deliver. So this whole feature originated as part of a user voice, and now it's live. So, you know, many times in our user group, we always recommend that if you have a great idea or if you have a suggestion, don't be shy to go and voice it on user voice. And this is living proof that it does actually work. So another update. So Microsoft has a concept called the Secure Score. For those that have never explored their Secure Score, essentially Microsoft has a list of parameters and settings and recommendations that they evaluate your tenant against to determine how secure you are. So things like multi-factor authentication are there. Things about how often you check your risky logins are there. The list goes on, and Microsoft has previously had a few different secure scores. There was a secure score for Office 365. There was one for Azure. I believe there might have been a third one. But now that they're consolidating everything under one umbrella of a Microsoft Secure Score, many of our clients have seen their score jump up or down or all over the place in the last couple of weeks. So if you're seeing your score change, you know, don't worry, you don't have, you know, your security didn't get necessarily worse than it was before, but there's new guidelines and new posture that you should probably take a look at and reevaluate what else could be done within your environment. The next is around Teams. So Microsoft is expanding how many participants you can have into a Teams meeting up to 10,000 members. So in this scenario, you no longer have to only use a live event if you have more than 250 attendees. So a month ago, if you had an all hands meeting for more than 250 attendees, you were forced to use a live meeting, which has its benefits. It also has some trade-offs. Now you're able to have your traditional collaborative meeting with up to 10,000 people. So it's a welcome change. Another change that we're seeing here is around the chatting that you can do with your fellow co-editors when you're co-authoring a document. So previously, if you were in a Word file along with your colleague, you would have a right panel where you can have a chat about the document while you were both co-authoring the document. Unfortunately, that chat had a lot of limitations. It wasn't so much like Word comments where you can tie it to a paragraph or a specific word. It was yet another way just to have a chat inside the Office 365 platform. So Microsoft has decided that instead of continuing with this path, they've eliminated this one additional chat option. Instead, you would still see the people's names in the top right corner, and you can initiate a chat with them over Teams, which we believe would probably be a more efficient way of collaborating and co-authoring. So if you see this disappearing from your tenants, you didn't do anything wrong. This was part of a plan change. So there's a new feature coming for Teams, which is the ability to pop a chat out. I think we've all been in situations where we're in a meeting and we switch context really quick, or we need to chat with multiple people at the same time. And previously, everything was contained within one Teams window. Now, with this new ability, we'll be able to pop out a chat window, just like our AOL Instant Messenger could do back in the day. And we can have multiple pop-outs being able to share a single screen. So this is starting to roll out right now, and it's expected to complete by the end of next month. So another feature that's pretty exciting is the new term store and content management features that Microsoft has been developing for SharePoint Online. This was demoed at Ignite last year, and even at the SharePoint conference in Vegas 6 months prior to that. This is now starting to hit the production tenants. So if you have a targeted release tenant, which was formerly known as a first release tenant, you'll start to see it later this month going into next month. And if you're in a standard release, like most production environments should be, you'll start getting that by early summer. So we definitely would like to give a huge thanks to Intellizy for sponsoring our session tonight. And we're going to hand it over to Pamela to give us a little bit of knowledge in terms of what they do and how they do it and how they could benefit our membership group here.
Sure.
So Pamela, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. So I have to just say I've been dying to do this, but hello all you cats and kittens out there. So my name is Pamela Wheelwright. I'm Senior Director of Client Services for Intellizy. If you're not familiar with Intellizy, I'm just going to give you a very quick overview as to who we are. We're actually change management experts as well as learning and development specialists. And this is relative to this particular group. If you are working in an enterprise and you're having any issues around adoption and usage. So I'll dive a little bit into that in terms of why you should care. When, now we've seen, especially with this COVID-19, there are a lot of people working from home, and you've also got multi-generations working at the same time, and people do things a little bit differently. Well, now with the COVID-19, people are home, and some of them are starting to do sort of social chats and video, gatherings, and they're utilizing things like Zoom because it's free and that's what other people, have access to. So how do you now take the fact that you've or your organization have invested in this Office 365 or M365, which includes Teams, and you want to try to get your users to take advantage to every piece of application and technology feature functionality within that so that you get a higher level return on investment. So you're savvy because you are IT, but not all of your end users are savvy. And a lot of times they'll go back to what they're familiar or comfortable with. So I'm going to give you a live example, which is kind of sad, I guess, given my age, but I was in a live meeting earlier in the year working on a document. And the boomer in the room said, I'm going to print this out. It was just easier for him to work on it that way. I had my laptop in front of me. There was a millennial who had a pad. I don't know if it was an iPad or what. And just as we were all kind of laughing at, oh my gosh, this is a multi-generational, scenario in practice, Gen Z comes in and said, am I supposed to be in this meeting because I just got a notification? They were pointing to their wearable. So just, real life example about how everyone works differently. But why does something like change management, why would that matter to this group? Well, the reality is Microsoft themselves, as they implemented Teams, had difficulty having all of their internal users adopt it as quickly as they wanted. Not only some of the features, but all of the features. So Microsoft actually had hired an organization to do a study, and they did a study to look at why is modern workplace difficult for some, but not others to embrace. Right? So the online, well, if you look at different generations, they grew up online, others didn't. But now everyone's got multiple devices, working from anywhere. Even if in the past you've been told, working from home probably isn't a thing to do. Once this virus is over, it's going to be hard for organizations to be able to say to a staff member, yeah, you can't work from home. You got to be in the office all the time, when they've been able to possibly produce the same level of productivity while they were working from home. Not everyone will, but it's just different ways of working. And what Microsoft found is they had to go beyond the deployment and activation of Teams, even within their own company. People were still gravitating to Skype for Business for some things, and then again, using all different tools instead of embracing all of the full feature functionality in something like Teams. So Microsoft thought, if they're having difficulty getting this out there, clients are certainly going to have that. They brought in a whole adoption change management program within their organization, and it was probably a 2-year rollout. So if Microsoft had to do that, how easy then is it going to be for other organizations who aren't already in that forest surrounded by Microsoft trees? How easy will it be for them to actually start to adopt and embrace? And you may know this from your own experience. How many people within your company are really using all the full features of Teams? Or how many still gravitate to other different technologies or things that they could be using Teams for, but still go back to, after that one training session, they go back to what they're comfortable and familiar with. And so that's where we come in. And of course, it's always ideal to sort of come in at the beginning of those conversations of what is it the company's trying to do? Are you trying to shift to, digital transformation, modern workplace, etc.? But people don't just change because we want them to. They kind of resist it. It depends on your corporate culture. But we look at all of that. We have different levels of assessment to look at that. Sometimes there's shadowing of IT, and we have that, of course, more and more often, more frequently out in the enterprise environment today. Teams is much more than just the technical migration or integration. Absolutely, that is a huge part of it. But when you have to look at the technology and the culture and the people, if you aren't looking at the people and getting good champions on board or doing assessments to identify where are some skills gaps, then it doesn't matter how great your vision is within the company and how wonderful the tools are that you have available to people. If they're not adopting it, at the end of the day, you cannot measure that as a successful implementation. So I'm showing you just a couple of scenarios. A company invests in Microsoft 365, but they still use their Skype for Business and they use other type of solutions. So what's the result? They're slow to adopt, or you have partial adoption, a poor ROI, and no measurable improvement in efficiency, which is why the company invested in it to begin with. And then there's companies that offer training. A certain percentage of the employee base will access the training or take the training, but without measurable ways to look at where were they to begin with, what type of training did they need, and have they continued to keep that learning and development sort of culture, methodology, process available to them. What ends up happening is you just get these pockets of enthusiasm. That's great. They take the class on Thursday. Monday morning, they've forgotten all about what they learned on Thursday. So the change management with a learning and development approach, it's very strategic, but I can tell you it is proven. It really does help. It's not limited to Microsoft Teams, but this is perfect example of where even the organization that developed the application had to implement something like this to get it started. In fact, we're actually part of Microsoft's new partner program, which is Adoption Change Management. We are not system integrators or cloud providers. We're pure consulting and training or learning and development resources. So there's a lot of things going on. One of the things that we're going to be giving away today is a free 30-day trial for someone so they can access what we can do on the learning and development side around Teams. And Dimitri, I'll kind of let you handle all of that, but just to give you a quick look of what that is, we actually have a Scorm. So if you have a learning management system already in-house, I think our version is 1.2 of Scorm, you can actually incorporate that into your LMS. There's so many benefits there. We have found that with an on-screen trainer, that they, your audience stays engaged longer and they actually pick things up a little bit faster. You can have them do these assessments so that they can see where they are in the process. Maybe they don't need the beginner court, maybe they need the intermediate, because every individual person is going to have different, levels that they learn as well as where they're starting from. And you can benchmark or bookmark, I should say, bookmark right at the point in the video that you're watching if something really resonates with you. So you don't have to go back and watch the whole thing again. It will bookmark at the exact point, as well as take lessons. And one thing that is not on here for benefits that should be is we also offer closed caption, and we do it in 10 languages. So if your company is global and you need to have it in simplified Chinese or French, etc., that's also available. So a little bit about Intellizy. I hope that gives you a good idea of who we are and how we can work with you and make your team's implementation a success.
Thank you, Pamela, for that.
You're welcome.
I will share my screen. Thanks again to Intellizy for sponsoring. We really appreciate it. Moving forward to our main event for tonight. So we have breaking down the Teams Architecture 201 with DRC Hess. So DRC, over to you.
Thanks. It's great to be here. This is my first time actually presenting for this user group. I'm really excited about it. Okay. So everything should be up and about. Let me know if you guys can't see it. Welcome to Breaking Down the Teams Architecture. It is generally a 201, but today we're going to take it to all levels depending on our audience and some of the questions you guys might have. Feel free to ask questions anytime during this presentation. I'm happy to do so. We're going to be covering a few different topics that kind of all tie into the architecture and how you make the best decisions for you in your implementation of Teams within your org. So a little bit about me. My name is DRC Hess, and I am an Office Apps and Services MVP and a senior cloud architect with a consulting company called Cloudway. You feel free to tweet, email me, message, send smoke signals these days. Happy to always interact with anybody, even for just coffee chats at this point. Okay. So first, we're going to go over a little bit about what Microsoft Teams is. Since a lot of people haven't rolled it out yet, they're still figuring out what they want to do, which applications they really want to use. We're going to talk a couple seconds about what Teams actually is and what can be used for. Then we'll finally get to the meat of our presentation in talking about the architecture, some do's, some don'ts, some things to think about, where your data actually gets stored and lives in, and then we're going to wrap it up by governance, because anytime you are going to roll something out, it's great to know the pieces. It's also great to understand how those pieces come together and what you should be thinking about as you roll them out. Okay, so what is Teams? Teams is the new hub for teamwork inside of Office 365. Microsoft is really pushing it as really the focus of the new collaboration capabilities that are available to you. The goals for everything from chat and meetings and telephony with calls and voice, you know, the integration of Skype to business going in there, plus the extensibility capabilities with new bots and things that can come from the store, really help to bring this to be a uniform experience that you can choose for your users how they want to collaborate and how they want to work together, kind of moving forward. Good stuff. So what is Teams for you in your organization? I know in my organization, we're a smaller org and we use everything, but we're 7 MVPs. We kind of, you know, we buy into the Kool-Aid sometimes. So for you guys, you have to decide really what you want Teams to be for you. Do you want it to just be your platform? Do you want it to be for full-on collaboration? Are you using it just to replace your file shares that you may have? And we'll talk about some of the things you might want to think about there. You know, voice in meetings, you know, the line of business replacements. Are you going to rebuild those solutions to work with Teams and create a unified experience between all the applications inside of Microsoft 365? Or are you a traditional SharePoint house that is now thinking, hey, maybe we want to move our intranet portal into Teams? And how do we do that? What are some of the things we think about? Teams is a lot of different things. So you may use all of these different options available to you. You might choose to use some of them. And it doesn't matter which ones you choose, as long as you have the ability to maintain, move forward, and provide adoption and training regarding it, you're going to do pretty well. Okay, so the things we're all really here for tonight, right? Teams architecture. So the architecture, I hate that. So the architecture, all right, got it, stop. So the Teams architecture is actually made up of a few things. So we have the Office 365 groups are going to be an integral part of the backend piece of the architecture. And it is because groups are really going to be that backend catalyst that helps to bring everything together as you're moving through Teams and Microsoft 365 in general. So that's going to help bring you that, you know, shared mailbox. It's going to help bring you, you know, the calendar, the access to, you know, Power BI and Planner, you know, the chats, the channels, the teams, all these different things are going to be available, but tied together on the back end using an Office 365 group. Just make sure I got this. Yeah, so there we go. Making sure I didn't miss anything since my slides have gremlins apparently. So what are teams? Teams in general are a container or a group where everybody can kind of come together and use all these tools in a common purpose. Now, how you're going to set up those teams, you can determine internally. We'll go over a couple options here today as well. From there, teams are your highest level of the architecture that you have. Then we move into channels. So unlike Slack and some of the other predecessors that we may have used in the past, they only had one layer. They were strictly just a channel focus. In Teams, we have a sub-layer, which is where our channels come into play. And this is where our work really happens. This is where we are individually chatting with people, we're having conversations, we're storing our documents in the document library that's a part of that channel. You know, we have different tabs and different content that's available within those channels. So if you think about your different work streams or your different departments that you might have within your organization, that's how you're going to be able to help pull all these together, is by segregating them out into different channels. And our new player to the scene is private channels. And private channels are a little bit special, and we're going to talk about some reasons why you may want to consider them, and some reasons if they will actually fit your needs in the right way as we kind of move forward. Okay, so when do we create a team? Like we mentioned, teams are the opportunity for a group to really get together. However, you know, we want to make sure that we stay within the limits of what Teams offers. So the biggest thing to think about is, one, how many people do you need to be a part of a team? Teams currently do have limits regarding how many people. I believe that limit is 5,000 people. However, they just mentioned that they are going to be rolling out and allowing up to 10,000 people to be a member of a team pretty soon. That can be great, especially for a larger organization. Do remember, though, that if you have an org that's, say, 20,000 people, maybe you're one of the larger pharmaceutical companies in the Boston area, you cannot make a single team that everyone in your organization is going to be able to fit in. So you're going to have to think about how you want to break things out into smaller, more consumable groups that can work together or have a common purpose, such as a department or a project team, as an example. Okay. And when do we think about channels? Channels are kind of that separate work stream capability. So example, if I have a project that I'm creating and I have multiple work streams or maybe multiple phases of that project working, I might break out those channels to be, say, the development team or the QA or the business analyst, or even maybe the executives or stakeholders, so that they can collaborate in their own based areas that are not necessarily closed down to everyone, but not necessary for everyone to have to read everything that goes in there. If you've ever been a part of a team or even a Yammer group or anything like that in the past, trying to drink from a fire hose comes to mind when you're trying to consume all this information. Some of it may be relevant to you, others may not. So we've already covered that we have the large organization, which is our team container, and then we have our channels, which is to help separate out team members into separate areas to collaborate on more singular topics. Okay. And our private channels. So private channels are different than a team or a regular channel. Okay, they don't have all of the same features. So I'm going to say proceed with caution with any private teams that you create. Private teams are wonderful in the fact that you can have them now. It was a very big user voice request that went back to Microsoft. However, in order to accomplish this task with the way that the team's architecture currently sits, is that when you create a new team, and then create a new private channel within that team, the private channel, instead of provisioning all the access that we get with like Planner and everything else that we get on the back of a channel, we only get a new site collection in SharePoint. Okay, so it allows us for a completely separate container where our documents and our permissions are based, but we don't get all of the extra features that you would get with a channel. Okay, so be very careful on whether you create private ones. My personal recommendation is to kind of stay away from them as much as possible, but if you need a private area where there's a lot of people, it might be better for you to create a private team. With private channels, one thing that you need to think about is that once you create a private channel, you need permission within that team to be able to create them. But if you create them, the site owner or the team owner may not be invited into that private channel. So you now have a team owner who can't access one piece of the content that's available inside of that team. Also, another thing to think about is that if you create these private channels, they are private and they are private forever. There is no, I'm sorry, we are now need to make this public. There is no reverse button because of the way it's provisioned. So when you create them, know that it is a permanent circumstance. You can move your content out of it. You can invite as many people as you want into it. However, you can't change the actual definition of that channel from private back to public. Okay. So just some things to think about. Okay. And then we have tabs. Tabs are kind of like, I'm going to call it Mr. Rogers' neighborhood of teams. Everything gets a tab. They wake you up in the morning and there's all of your content. So outside of the chat interface, the only way that you're going to be able to access your content within Teams through out of the box means anyway, is going to be by adding another tab. And those tabs can add, services such as Planner, such as Power BI, or some of your external third-party applications and integrations that you have. This easy way to do that is by going and just adding a tab. The services that you're allowed to use through a tab are going to be determined through your administrator. And that administrator is going to determine which apps are going to be allowed through that interface for you to be able to add as a tab within your teams and channels. So if there's something you don't see, like some of the Office apps or maybe Poly or some of the other ones, that is because your administrator has turned off the ability for you to have access to some of those additional apps that may live in the App Store. So, yeah.
We have a few questions from online.
Sure.
Pass your way. So we have a question from Bob. When the team owner deletes the team, do the private channels get deleted as well?
Yes, everything gets deleted. It's the same thing if you archive. When you go to archive a team, all of the private channel content will get archived as well with it.
Thank you. Next, we have a question from Chrissy. The question is, how many teams should or could a member be part of, or what are the best practices?
So people can be a member of many teams. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I can definitely get that for you. Best practices are, I personally don't want to be added to teams that I don't actively work in on a regular basis, just because it's very hard for me to filter out my work from things that I just might be interested in. So for me, in situations like that, I choose to pin a team to the top of the teams I'm actually actively working in, so you can use that to do it. You can also hide teams and channels so that you just don't see them. And then if a message comes up and stuff, you'll get notified and you'll be able to go back in and take a look at it. But that way it helps me keep my workspace a little bit cleaner, even if I'm a member of a lot of teams. But generally, if the teams are topic focused, like a project and things like that, obviously people are going to get added, or should get added by default to the projects they're a member of. And then, anything else, all private teams you're going to have to be invited into. But unless you're using search to go and hunt for any public teams that you think you may want to join, most of those are probably going to be pretty curated, would be my best answer for that one.
Great, thank you. And then we have a few more questions coming in.
Sure.
So another question is from Naveen. Can we still audit activities in private channels, or what features do they not have that a regular channel might have?
So the team owner cannot, unless they're invited into, they're not going to be able to access the content that lives within a private channel, unless they created it or unless they have been invited as an individual member of the private channel. In order to be invited to a private channel, you have to already be a member of that team. But I can look at the exact features that are available for private channels versus regular channels really quick for you. I forgot
Sure.
the exact things, but we can move to the next question. I can come back and answer some of these at the end.
Sure. And last question for this time being, does Teams have a remote access capability? This comes from Ed, saying that he's thinking about training scenarios where they'd like a collaborator to share their screen, but then they'd also want to take over control of that external user screen.
Kind of like TeamViewer. No, not currently. There is a user voice request out there for it, but I'm not exactly sure how many people have gotten to it. But it's not a roadmap functionality at this time. The only things that you could do would be, sharing your screen or trying to share a video and walk someone through something virtually, but you're not going to be able to do a screen takeover yet.
Perfect. Thanks, Darcy. That's it for now.
Okay. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, DRC, Does it also include request control? Because there is the ability to request control, but it's one of the things that we turned on at Staples. We actually had to turn on the fact that an anonymous could ask for control or vice versa. There's a definite security guard in place for that, so that in a meeting or peer one-on-one, we were able to do that. But that's not the same thing as the remote. But it could be a temporary fix, I guess. Is that something that you see?
Yeah, potentially. It could be an interesting evolution if Microsoft decides to go that way. So.
Yeah, so, and if I can just elaborate on that,
Sure.
One of the other security mechanisms in that is when somebody is sharing a screen, it will never show any elevated prompts. So if you want to give a tutorial of software that's already installed, then you can do that through the remote access control, like David had mentioned.
Got it.
But if you want to walk them through installing software, then that gets very complicated.
Yeah, definitely.
And one last point, just to chime in, the give control feature requires the person who's sharing their screen to have certain features enabled in their graphics card. So if they are on an older computer, that feature might just not be possible at all.
I was unaware of that. I've never run into that. There you go. Takes a village, but we answered it.
No worries. So some of the things you might want to think about when you go and create a private channel, which by the way, there's a max, I believe, of 30 per team. So you can't, you probably don't want to create a whole lot of private channels to begin with, but there is a limit to each team that you want to go create. So keep that one in mind as well. So a couple ideas for some of the first teams you may want to put together in your organization. Usually if you're starting a rollout and you haven't already had this in your organization for some time, these are four that I highly recommend, with a couple channels that you can create below them. So the first one would be getting to know teams. And the three channels I'd recommend would be, getting started, or how do I, or feedback loop. This will help, especially when you start creating those like early adopters that are going to get in there. They're going to have questions. They're going to want to be able to have, conversations around things and understand how to do different business scenarios that might be relative within your organization. The second one is Teams implementation. This should probably be the actual implementation team. So the group of individuals that are responsible for the rollout of Teams within your organization, and some different channels to kind of talk about some of the major work streams that would happen as a result of that. Teamwork champions. Champion networks are such an invaluable tool within your organization. Everyone knows who they go to ask questions of all the time. As an organization, it's important for you to know who those people are to help make sure they have the best information and that they're supported from the bottom up to be successful within your organization. And then support. So your support team, those who have to help manage it, your help desk people, because once they start getting questions about Teams, they're going to need a place to also be able to go ask each other or collaborate, or, pull tickets aside if you need to. So a couple ideas on your first teams and sets of channels to make if you haven't already in your orgs. Okay. So where does our data live? Right? It's the management nightmare, because in Office 365, now Microsoft 365, our content is spread out through all these great applications that we use all the time. So how do we kind of bring this back into focus? First, we need to understand how everything is really connected here, right? So we mentioned the Office 365 groups are the backend catalyst that kind of keeps everything together. These groups are given permissions through Azure Active Directory. So you're using Azure Active Directory for all your permission, your big security groups, everything through that area. From there, the 365 groups are going to provision your shared mailbox and calendar, your SharePoint site, a OneNote, and then as part of that, you also get the chat capabilities that are coming from Skype for Business as well. Okay, so that group provisions all of that, which you are then going to access using Teams. Now, additional features that you can bring into here, so we're kind of going into an extension of the out-of-the-box experience, is by being able to use the tabs in Teams to be able to extend the capabilities of your team using, Power BI or Planner or Dynamics or Flow or any of the external applications that you might have as well. And then if you're building your own applications, then we go into a whole nother layer of architecture that you are also going to have to think about. And those could be some of your line of business applications. If you are bringing in things from, new connectors that you're building, those are going to be the additional areas that you kind of want to think about as you're bringing your world into focus. Okay, so where's our data actually gets stored? It's really, really important, right? So all of our apps, everything from that, our user profiles, those are coming from Azure Active Directory and your Office 365 groups. Okay. Now, Mailbox, that is done through Exchange. Okay, so your one-on-one chats, if people lose them or something happens to them, those are stored through Outlook, and your Teams chats are actually stored through an Exchange shared mailbox. Okay, connected through the backend of Azure Cosmos DB. Okay, so you've got two different kinds of chats, your Teams and your one-on-one. Those are stored technically in two separate places if you're looking to find those as an administrator. Okay, SharePoint has a couple things. You've got your files, and then you also got, any files that you shared through chat. So it becomes a little interesting because the chat messages are stored in Exchange and Outlook, but your actual chat files are actually stored in OneDrive for Business, and your files that are stored inside of the Teams library is a SharePoint document library. So they are living inside of SharePoint, and the actual Teams site that is associated to your Office 365 group through Teams. Kind of confusing. Then we have the telephony side of Teams, which I'm only going to cover here because it's a whole nother realm of the Teams architecture. But all of your communications are going to happen through both Outlook and then Stream. Okay, so anything that you had regarding like your your regular meetings, your voicemails, things like that are going to go in through Outlook and be stored there. When you do recordings of meetings, such as maybe even this one, those are going to get saved off into Microsoft Stream. Okay, and that's using the media services through Azure. So kind of complicated. The other one that I'm missing on here, because I recently just kind of figured it out, was Planner. And Planner is actually stored in its own separate kind of application location. So it's really hard that if you were to delete something regarding the plan, you actually have to go into Planner to recover it. You're not going to be able to recover it directly through Teams itself. Okay, so any kind of questions regarding these two slides? I realize that these are kind of hard to digest a little bit.
A little salt, a little garlic, no problem.
Exactly. We need the cilantro in here. Okay. So we've talked about some of the major components of Teams. We've got the teams, the channels, the private channels, and tabs. Now we need to talk a little bit about how we maintain all of this and some things that you need to think about during your rollouts. We
actually have a quick question.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt. There's a little bit of a lag for our people that are online. So Lorraine asks, when I post a file to a private chat, where does the file go?
The file for a private chat is actually going to be stored. Let me go back to that slide. It's going to get stored in OneDrive. So private chats, and anytime you are doing a chat in general and sharing files, that is going to get stored and come from your OneDrive. If you're doing it and storing the file actually in like a channel where you're talking with a team, then it's going to get stored back into SharePoint.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Governance, our 21st century buzzword. So governance is a really, really important topic because while we've seen that you can create a lot of things, knowing who should have the power to create them and control them is going to be a really important thing that you want to think about. So the first part you want to think about is who can create teams. Sounds simple enough, right? But a lot of organizations kind of choose to do this in different ways. You can have self-service site creation, which means everybody can create their own teams, which means they're provisioning Office 365 groups and SharePoint sites and everything that comes with it. That oftentimes scares the living daylights out of IT pros and administrators because they see sprawl, right? I will assure you right now, it is unlikely that you are going to hit the limit for SharePoint sites and 365 groups and teams in your organization, in your tenant. It's okay to enable people to create teams and help get their work done. You can search things through the admin center and be able to help keep control over it on the back end as well, if you need. Another thing to think about are your team's naming conventions. Okay, these become important, especially when you start searching for potential teams that you want to join. It's about a little bit about discovery within your organization. You know, before you open up teams to the organization, if you're going to determine that there's going to be a team per department or function, do you want to go ahead and provision those teams ahead of time? Because if you allow a user to later, maybe they accidentally take the finance name for a team, and you can't use that consistently for your departments or naming. So just things to kind of think about, the order of operations and the consistency in the naming that you might want to think about. Okay. Guest access or external access. These are going to be two topics we're going to talk a little bit about. Think about whether your organizations collaborate with people outside of your org. Do those people get brought in through an Active Directory group where they are controlled and given permission to specific areas? Do you need to federate with other organizations, allowing someone with a domain name of Microsoft.com to be able to search and find you within your organization? A really good circumstance I had come up with a client recently is they were worried about rolling out Teams and someone being able to chat and find the CEO of the organization. They didn't want the CEO to be able to be found by external people. Those can all be controlled. Some of it through the old Skype for Business, PowerShell commands. They're not exactly Teams commands yet in some of them. But think about who needs to have access to what and how you want people to be able to collaborate, both internally and externally. Apps are going to be super important. Remember, these are not just apps we think of like Servicenow or GitHub or some of the other external third-party vendors that we might have, but even our regular Office applications like PowerPoint or Word or Planner. Any of those apps are apps that have to be enabled for users to choose and still have to be able to add as tabs in their channels. So my recommendation is always at least have the ones that are available within your tenant to add. The external ones might have to be narrowed down a little bit based on what as an administrator and governance team are going to allow, but remember to have the conversation. Okay. Not every org that is rolling out Teams is doing it for meetings. Remember, there are different licensing models for Teams, so we kind of need to make sure we take in an account for everyone. But do you want to make sure that you test the quality of the meetings and know how they work and everything before you roll that out? Just a thing to think about, because users are going to have questions. As you can see, we're learning how to use the live meeting capabilities and still running into fun things every once in a while. And then the length of your experiment. Anytime you're going to roll this out in Teams to a new organization or even a new group of users, you need to determine, who that first initial set of users is going to be. And that initial set of users, you need to have a time period that they're going to get used to it before you start scaling out Teams to the rest of your organization. So just kind of think about it and make sure to put a limit on it. We don't want this to become the SharePoint server that was sitting under someone's desk and then magically became prod. We want to kind of use this as the ability to gain feedback, to introduce change management to the org and prepare them so that when you do scale this solution out, you're going to be prepared and help save your service desk and you guys maybe a few extra bottles of Excedrin a long way. Okay. I really dislike some of these things every once in a while. So I'm gonna kind of go here for a second because automation sucks sometimes. So one of the things we need to think about is really how do you collaborate within your organization? There's three primary ways that people will collaborate in the Microsoft world, and that's using Outlook. So we talked about some of those generational things a little bit earlier. Some people just like to send an email. You're also going to have Teams. That's going to be your live persistent chat. It's the ability to get a hold of someone kind of right now. And then we have Yammer. Yes, I brought up Yammer during a Teams conversation. Yammer is really that fire hose, right? It's a place where people can go and have a conversation that's more org-wide focused, in very large, broad audiences. But it's okay to not have to see every little thing that comes in. It's one of those, I might have a couple minutes, I want to go check something out, versus I need an answer right now. Okay. So when we provision an Office 365 group, this comes under the governance policy and not just what a group is the fact that we need to determine, are we going to have expiration policies as part of these? And what that does is that helps us with the lifecycle management of a team. If we set it for, hey, every 6 months, I want to be able to check up on people and make sure that they still need their team, or can I archive it or delete it or get rid of it based on your compliance policies and things like that within your org. This is a way to help go set that up. Okay, this is set up through the admin center, and it's called the Office 365 Groups Expiration Policy. So you can go set that up, and it'll help you guys with that fear of sprawl or not understanding what's in your org, or how do I know when things aren't needed anymore. It's just kind of one of those refreshers to kind of bring you guys back into the fold. We have our external access decisions. So like we just talked about a couple seconds ago, is we need to know whether we need to allow or block guest access to specific domains. So things like Microsoft.com or cloudway.us, or different addresses of people that you want to be able to federate and talk with and work with. You can also block ones that you don't want to. So you can say, hey, I like everybody except for Microsoft this day. I'm joking. No one, please go back to Microsoft and say that by any means. Okay, so we should be able to kind of bring this back.
We actually have a quick question that's related to that.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, could external users access the meeting's recordings?
No, they have to actually be shared. And an interesting thing I actually encountered today with that is that because they live in stream, they actually have to be shared out unless you give them access to like the stream channel where those meetings are being stored. But if you share, the interesting part is if you're sharing with someone else, I found that I actually couldn't get into the sharing link that I actually sent because it wasn't directly shared with myself. It was kind of a very weird thing today. I don't even think Microsoft even realizes that. But the answer is no. They won't be able to just get to it. They actually are going to have to. The recording will have to be shared with that person.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Any other questions so far? give it a second.
There are so many questions.
Well, we can take a couple right now. I don't mind.
Okay.
We have time.
So Suman asks, how does Microsoft envision Teams to replace SharePoint? Can you please provide some highlights?
Okay. So the quick answer is Teams will never replace SharePoint. Okay. Teams itself is actually very, very dependent and integrated on the back end of SharePoint because all of the files and all of that content actually lives within SharePoint itself. So, and that's why when you provision a team, you actually get a Microsoft SharePoint Teams site as part of the group creation for that team. However, the messaging is very much focused on, you know, in the past, how we collaborated out with our intranets is very much a one-to-many kind of focus, right? Our intranets, with the exception of team sites, which was that kind of collaboration space, were very much focused on very few content editors placing content out there to be consumed by the rest of the organization. Where Teams really comes into play is kind of not a replacement, but more of a complementary entry point into collaboration. So where in the past we would use strictly team sites to do a lot of our collaboration, we'd have to write, you know, text inside of a, you know, discussion web part or things like that to be able to kind of collaborate on a project. We didn't have the chat capabilities. We didn't have the meeting capabilities that we desperately wanted out of team sites. Those are things that Teams offers. But where the team site will still come into play with that is that you can take your intranet site, you can take your team site that's set up regarding that thing that's a one-to-many and bring that in as a tab inside of your team as a way to kind of visually move people through more static and accessible content, but still have the chat capabilities and all the rich features that Teams brings back into the mix available to you as well. So it's not going to ever be a one versus the other. It's really just an additional access point and tool inside of your tool belt to help you guys get work done, if that helps make sense.
That makes sense to me. I think that was a great answer. Thank you. What else do we have here? If you know, so Andrea asks, if you know where chat files are stored, that special folder hidden, correct?
Yeah.
Could you get in there and delete an entire chat? Currently, can't do this in the Teams interface. Is it coming?
The ability to delete a chat?
Yeah, it sounds like what they're looking to do is to delete a chat specifically from the back end.
Let me look.
That's kind of loaded though, because of all the auditing capabilities. That's something that you've got to be really careful about, because you have the audit system happening as well in security and compliance.
Yeah, like they can, an IT administrator, and they have to basically, they're the only people who can do that. They can edit, you know, message permissions for Teams and grant people permissions to delete messages in Teams channels. But right. Yeah, you want to be super careful about deleting things, because if you have compliance policies or e-discovery, things that are required for your organization to maintain and store those chat messages and files and things that were openly shared, you may not be able to do that. Like there may be actual policies preventing you from being able to do that. So just to be on the safe side, like, yes, you can delete a chat that you started, but, you know, be very, very careful on deleting things. And on the other side of that, don't ever put something that is personal that you wouldn't want an IT admin or your boss ever finding out inside of a Teams chat or a message or anything of that kind inside of a work environment or a work tenant. Just play the safe side of it.
An excellent PSA. Thank you.
Yeah, it can be found. Any other questions?
Yeah, Chrissy asks, regarding storage, I noticed that messages sent to the team from Outlook are automatically stored in a SharePoint folder called email messages. Can that automated SharePoint folder be renamed without affecting the functionality?
I haven't tested that, but my best answer would be do not ever delete something that SharePoint or Teams requires to possibly work. Because if it, I'd have to check how that API is working, but if it's looking for a specific folder to store things in and that folder is not there, then it could create some problems. So I haven't intentionally tried to break it, but you know, best advice is don't delete it, don't rename it.
Don't try to break Teams.
Yeah, don't try to break Teams. Like the poor team's going through, you know, scaling craziness right now.
If you want to know a story, I had a project manager decide that he didn't like the name of a channel that he did. So in SharePoint, because he was somewhat savvy, changed the name of the folder in SharePoint, and automatically Teams self-destructed whenever they clicked it on the files for that channel. Yes. It just basically gave them a phenomenal error of epic proportions.
So I really need to put together my governance, you know, presentation at some point. What not ever to do. Yes, I've seen that happen. That actually is very scary when that happens. Or trying to rename the SharePoint site to something else. Yeah. Try not renaming things. So this is why, you know, naming ahead of time is going to be a really important conversation.
Okay. We've got another great question from Andrea here. I love this one because we've all run into this one. Are all teams now visible to the Office 365 admin, at least from a governance perspective, whether or not the Office 365 admin is a member of that team in the office, in the admin center?
In the admin center, not exactly, no. They are still working on being able to add some of the things like private channels and some of that information in there. But even if you can't see it inside of the admin center right away, they're working on it. You can run PowerShell to get it. So you can get access to all that information. You just won't be able to see all of it directly in the interface just yet, but it's coming.
You can also see an Azure Active Directory as well in groups. That's fun.
Azure Active Directory is very special. Yes, indeed.
I believe you can also see the SharePoint site for the group in the SharePoint admin center.
Correct.
Even if you don't see it in the Teams admin center.
That's absolutely correct, yes. So
there's lots of inconsistency. Enjoy.
I'll create a slide on that and add it in when I send you guys my deck. All right. So I guess we'll kind of go ahead and move on to guest access really quick. So guest access is enabled in the Teams admin center. So just like SharePoint or Active Directory or anything like that, we now have yet another admin center to kind of go think about. But guest access for Teams specifically is within the Teams admin center. Okay, what you can do, you can grant access to existing teams and channels that are part of those teams. Remember, permissions for teams are set at the team level. So Microsoft has the idea that if you're part of a team, you should be able to access everything within a team. The exclusion being that private channel, which you have to be specifically invited into once you're a member of the team. Okay, but you can't, an example of that is you cannot invite an external user into a private channel without them being a member of the team. Okay. And that access is given at an individual permission level to an individual user. Okay.
DRC, have they changed that? Because one of the things that we had when private channels were first introduced,
Yep.
we had individuals creating a private channel, inviting someone who was not in the primary team, and it says they don't even exist in Azure Active Directory. Look it up. And so we, after a couple of minutes banging my head against a brick wall without a helmet, I realized they're not into the team. I said, are they part of the primary team? They're like, no. As soon as we added them to the primary team, sure enough, all of a sudden, bing, there they were in the private channel. So even internal employees were not allowed. And that's why I'm asking, has that changed? Because from our experience at Staples, we actually dealt with that and actually found that if you're not a part of the primary team, you're not even allowed to become part of the secondary, the private channel.
Correct. That's exactly it. Like if you're not part of the team, you can't be a part of the channel. So yeah, you're absolutely right on that. So, trying to figure out what you're asking, what changed.
Oh no, I thought because the way you say only external, it was external. So I'm like, oh, internal, you don't have to do that anymore. So.
Oh no, it's anybody.
Okay.
If you are not a member of the team, you cannot be a member of the channel of the any private channel at all. So you have to be a member of the parent before you can join the children.
Roger that. Thank you.
Yep. Sorry, I was getting confused there on what the question was. All right. So private channels, right? So SharePoint, still a key factor in here. So you get your private site collection. It's managed by Microsoft Teams. You get your container for the library, but no Pages support. Pages is one thing that you get with your regular public channels that you do not get with private channels. So just kind of think about those, as you're looking to create them as well. Okay. Then we have external access. So we talked about, our guest access. External access are people outside of your organization. So again, you can configure it in the admin center. They don't get access to Teams or Teams resources. Okay, this is where that admin is going to determine who is allowed to be able to basically chat. It's almost basically chat federation, and set and call up meetings with you through that. By default, again, all external domains are allowed with the option. So it's one of those, unless you lock them down, it's kind of one of those things to always know what the defaults are ahead of time before you guys kind of get yourselves wrapped up in stuff. All right. Again, a big piece of governance is being able to create your champions program and determine what capabilities you want to roll out to the org, how you want them to be able to execute and be able to help make sure that the messaging is consistent and has positive reinforcement. Many of us lived through the SharePoint days of I hate SharePoint. And that was due to so many reasons that no longer exist, but SharePoint has that reputation sometimes. So when it comes to Teams, if you're rolling out any new piece of functionality, whether it be Teams or, Access or some other, application within your org, you want to be able to make sure that people have a positive experience right away and positive reinforcement to continue using it and growing the adoption of it. Okay. All right. And the last piece that we're going to talk about today is customization. Not everybody's going to need to customize Teams. Teams does a lot on its own, but excuse me. As we start really, extending Teams and its capabilities and having it replace potentially some of those line of business applications that we had, or creating new processes that are based on Teams, just like we did with SharePoint. we're eventually going to end up in the customization route. So I just want to take the last few minutes that we kind of have and talk about some of the customization capabilities that are available to you. And you guys, again, will have to have that governance conversation regarding which ones you guys want to do and how things should kind of be built. But some different ones that you can think about are, they can be scoped to a team or they can be scoped to an individual, depending on the kind of customization needs that you have. Some of the major and very popular customizations that we have are things like notifications or bots, the provisioning of new tabs when a new team is created, messaging extensions or commands, and then bringing in information or getting information from Microsoft Graph to go ahead and create some of these experiences. And there's a couple of different publishing modes for the developers that are on this call. And there's a lot of documentation out there as well. Okay. So some of the customizations that we have here, this is an example of a bot. So in this case, you can easily ask a bot to go do things. Things like Q&A bots are available. There's Q&A Maker that is super easy. Even an end user like myself at times can set those up and help train them using AI to be able to go do some great things as well. This kind of example is a little bit different. This is using something called an adaptive card. And an adaptive card is used pretty well within Teams in 3 different places currently. But if you're creating your own content that can show up in here, being able to create these cards, that provide functionality to the user and tell them to go do something such as set a due date or move, or view in Contoso if this is coming from an external application, are kind of a neat way to be able to kind of help extend some of those capabilities coming forward. Okay. We have some of our messaging extensions, so different things that you can easily search for just from the bottom. These are just examples of like work items that can be created and be able to be moved out as well. So different ways of kind of accessing new comment and new commands. For our individual messages, we can easily go, if someone is talking about something, to create an extension that creates an action item based on something. Where I've seen this would be if people are having Servicenow, as an example, for their help desk. Sometimes they need to take a conversation offline before they provide the answer back in the official area of Servicenow. So sometimes you can bring that conversation back into Teams in a chat and be able to create new work items that are action items based on the conversation you're having directly from the conversation that you're in. So it's a way to help bring some of those line of business applications and connectivity back to each other. It's a really neat capability. And then from the top, this is actually some of my favorites. We can also create some customizations. And some of my favorite ones here would be like, asking who's on call tonight. I can easily just type a command in there and be able to get different information or be able to create new functionality from the top. So I'm not leaving Teams under any circumstance to be able to go work with my different applications or people involved. I'm just using a different way to access it right in the context of the application that I'm in. So I believe that was my last one. So that is a lot of things that we've kind of covered today. And architecture is only, sadly, a small portion of it. And knowing what to do with it is the bigger piece of it. But I'm happy to take any additional questions that you have share some coffee and pizza.
All right. We have a question from Scott, who says, in the last 2 weeks, I've created teams for each of 2 nonprofits that suddenly need to hold a handful of virtual meetings. I added future attendees as guests, but the only way to add them was one at a time. Is there a way to copy and paste a list of names and email addresses?
I might ask David on that one, because that actually sounds more like an Active Directory thing. I don't know about the ability to mass add people into a team.
I think it's really more of a difference between the interface in Teams versus the interface in Outlook. In Outlook, we could just paste a bunch of people in the.
That is correct.
In the required. In Teams, I don't know of a way to do that, but
there is a way. However, it's PowerShell. It's so sorry. From a user interface, it's not there. I'm hoping I'm not stepping on my bounds of NDA, but I'll be careful on how I say this. I have heard by somebody's father's brother's nephew's cousin's former roommate that it's going to be possible that they're changing that so that you can actually mass add in multiple ways, like from an Excel spreadsheet or from a semicolon denominated email list. So there is some work that's supposedly happening. Just with all the things happening with COVID-19 and them scrambling for the support and stability of everything that's going on right now, it's probably going to be back. It's that something like that's going to be back shelved. That's definitely a low priority.
Yeah. The only other thing I could think of is if those people were all a member of an Azure Active Directory group already, then you could just, invite the group there. Or if they were a member of a channel already, then you could just, invite the channel. That would be the only other ways I could think about adding large numbers of people at one time.
So another question, Rachel asks, what are the plans with Wiki? Are there plans to enhance the functions for it? For example, moving a wiki to another channel. Also, the meeting notes in Wiki by default. Meeting notes wiki is created in the person who starts the notes. What if that person leaves the meeting and a new person is added? The new person won't be able to see the older notes.
Yes.
Thoughts?
There's a lot there to kind of unpackage, but the ability to move a wiki to another channel or another team is probably not going to be in the immediate future. There would be bigger priorities, and that would be like reassociating like a channel to a different team, kind of thing that would come well before like the breaking down that far. So that would not individually happen. As far as notes, like I've run into that problem where I've not been able to access notes that someone else took regarding a meeting. So what I personally do is I use the OneNote notebook to take meeting notes, and I just put the date and section it out so that everybody can have access to it afterward. And I haven't run into any problems regarding those, but I have run into that same problem with the wikis. I don't know of anything currently that is on the roadmap or immediate train of thought for extending their capability at the moment.
Okay. Thank you. We have a two-part question from James. Can a team or channel be renamed? And the second part is, can teams or channels be combined?
So the second part, the answer is no. Everything is segregated. You cannot combine things. The only thing that you could do is do an export of the messages to an HTML file and then store that HTML, basically chat history back into the document library in the other team. And then you could move files to the other document library. That you can do, but you can't merge teams or channels, and you can't separate them out either. Teams, you can create new channels, but you can't take a channel and create more channels from that. There's no grandchildren kind of capability. And what was the first part of it? I'm sorry.
Can it be renamed? Can teams or channels be renamed? I remembered.
You know, I haven't tried that actually. So I actually don't know.
So I can give you some answers for that one. The answer to that is sort of. You can rename it, but you're only, if you're familiar with Exchange components, what you're doing is you're changing the display name.
Yeah, you're not.
So when teams and channels are first created, as DRC mentioned, there's a whole bunch of stuff that gets provisioned in the background. The names of those things create URLs and stuff like that. Those will never be changed upon a rename, but you can do a rename and it will change it, how it's displayed in the Teams interface. But the URL behind it will always have the original name, the very first name that was ever assigned to it, in it. And also, last I checked, and David, maybe you have an update on this because I haven't tested this in a long time. But if you can rename a channel, but the folder in the document library behind that will not rename to reflect that rename change. And if you try to rename it manually, bad things happen, as were discussed in a previous question.
Yeah, I still have the same crying towel from that
Yeah.
whole incident.
So that they haven't done anything to fix or bulletproof that yet?
No.
The easiest answer is, if you ever have an instance where you want to rename, don't rename anything except for a document.
I would actually love to see them just change it so that every channel gets its own library.
Yeah.
That would be really nice.
Yeah. We'll see how that one goes. I agree.
They don't ask me these things, so yeah.
You mean they'd actually be able to have different types of metadata attached to them, so it'd be of a higher value?
Oh, David. Oh, my dear little IA heart. I know. Those conversations have been happening, by the way, and they are in user voice as well. So they do ask you. They ask you to go to user voice and input your feedback that is reviewed during their actual meetings. Not lying. They actually do review it.
So another question.
No, actually, in fact, I was just gonna, if I can just say, just on top of that, what DRC said, I just put in the announcements there that the last question about merging of channels,
Yeah.
if you take a look, or if you go to user voice, the features team has acknowledged they've gotten so many requests on this that they are actually looking into it. So user voice is definitely monitored.
That's great news. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
All right. Naveen asks, if users store unlimited video recordings in Stream, do we run into any storage issues? Does anybody know what the storage cap is for Stream?
It's part of the SharePoint cap, actually.
Yeah, it's part of the SharePoint.
Really?
It's quite, it's a lot. Like,
it's a lot.
Buy more.
And you have to understand, all information captured in Office 365 is actually compressed hardcore into SQL databases. So what would be like, let's say 500 we'll even say 500 megabytes on your platter, on your laptop or your regular desktop, if you're not using solid state. That thing gets compressed pretty heavily in the SQL database. So you have to understand the storage there is extremely generous.
It's like 500 gigs base storage plus an additional 0.5 gigs for each user licensed. So
yeah, I could see with video, and especially if you do a lot of recordings of meetings.
Yeah.
Because video doesn't compress super well.
No, but what it does is it goes through Azure Media Services. So it's actually using the microservices to really compress the living daylights out of it. So
yeah, that's cool.
It's not the initial upload. It's going through that service first. So
You have to understand at Staples
It's a
with our
lot
production
of
studio.
magic.
Yeah, with our production studio, we have a lot of video over the last 3 years. So, and we haven't even made a dent in what we have available in our storage. So I understand that, but at the same time, from a storage perspective, even with Stream, with all the different things that are going on, as DRC pointed out in the background, I would not be highly concerned about that. And if it really starts to become a problem down the road, let's say 5 to 7 years, then it's time to start thinking about actually putting, retention policies in place.
yeah, are some of those videos still needed or relevant anymore? And I mean, the one thing we've also learned a lot about some of the limits regarding like SharePoint sites and file sizes and list limits and things over the years is that the more and more that organizations start to use them, we see consistent increases in the caps and limits that were allowed through Microsoft. So as Microsoft makes their services more available and consumable and scalable, we're going to continue to be able to get more out of that as well.
Yeah, and if you do need to purchase more, Microsoft charges $100 a month for an additional 500 gigabyte capacity.
Yeah.
So, and you're paying less than 25 cents for a gigabyte per month, essentially. So if that does become a problem, it is pretty simple to scale it up.
Yep. Definitely. All right. Well, with that, I will turn it back over to you. And thanks everyone for having me.
Thank you, DRC.
Thank you for speaking. I really appreciate it.
Always.
Alrighty then, Dimitri, if you would be so kind.
All right, so thanks again to DRC for this great presentation. I know we couldn't get to all of the questions that were asked, but we will be having a social after hours event directly after this that we'll talk about in just a minute, that we can talk more about Office 365. So a few more slides just to close out today's session. We always like to highlight other community events that are happening in the area as well as online. So there was an event called Teams Thursday, New England, which was very similar to a SharePoint Saturday, but this was really focused around Teams instead of SharePoint. Originally, it was going to happen a couple of weeks ago. Due to COVID, it was postponed to be June 3rd in person. It's still up in the air whether this will happen in person or if it will move to more of an online format. But keep an eye on this in their website to really keep an eye on what's happening there. So there's also a few additional events happening. Microsoft has recently announced that the Ignite conference will be moved to an online-only format. It's still scheduled to take place this September. So Microsoft hasn't released a lot of information about pricing changes or anything else along those lines yet, but definitely keep an eye on the Ignite website to learn more as they announce upcoming changes. And there's also a monthly online meeting call for women IT pros. So if you're in the IT pro side of the house, definitely check that out. If there's anything that we're missing or any other events you'd like to promote, please post that as part of the Q&A chat, and we'll certainly call that out before the end of this. So we'd like to also call out a few user groups in the area that are live, active, and appropriate to visit. So the first one is the Rhode Island SharePoint users group that DRC actually runs. She founded and has been running the group for several years now. They meet on the first Tuesday of every month. And DRC, correct me if I'm wrong here.
Nope, you're right. And right now we are actually in the process of being able to move our user group to be virtual as well. So if anyone is open and looking to speak, please reach out to me. I'm looking to fill up slots for as long as we possibly can, but you can go to the Ricebug meetup group and reach out to us from there as well.
Okay, thank you. We also have the Hartford Office 365 user group that's run by Jared. They usually meet the same day that we meet, so if you're going to pick one of the two, we definitely would prefer that you pick us. But if you are in the Hartford area, and once the whole COVID thing passes, it's a great group of people down there to come and hang out with. Last but not least, from the SharePoint side of things, there's also the Granite State SharePoint user group. They meet the first Thursday of each month up in New Hampshire, and Julie Turner and Jim Wilcox are the organizers of that group. We have a few other user groups in the area if you're invested in the Microsoft stack, including Boston Azure, the Boston Power BI, the New England Link Skype for Business / Teams user group, as well as the Boston Powershell user group. So coming up next time, we have a few speakers and a few topics that are in the pipeline, but we are waiting to confirm on which one will be available for the May 21st date. And keep an eye out on our Twitter as well as our email and newsletters. But we will be hosting it on May 21st. It will be an online event just like this one has been, and we look forward to seeing you there as well.
And we will make sure that there's enough tickets available this time.
Yes, we definitely apologize. Typically, we set up our Eventbrite to have a ticket cap of 100 tickets. This was more common, especially when we were meeting in person. But now that we're online, we actually exceeded the 100 user cap about a week ago. So after some people reached out to DRC and others, we bumped that cap up. And since we're using Teams, we can actually have up to 10,000 people. So that should not be a problem going forward. So typically we ask if there's any questions, tips, problems, anyone hiring or looking for work. Given the online format, if you enter that in the chat, we'll circle back to this slide after we finish the raffle. So one more time, a huge thanks to IntelliZ. Without our sponsors, this group would not be possible to keep running. So thank you once again. Okay, so for raffle. So the way we're going to run this raffle,